This is the moonnco podcast, where we help you take back control of your well-being and regain your mental clarity. Join our growing community for resources, support, and guidance at moonnco.com. This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice.
Welcome back to episode 12 of the moonnco podcast. We might have a lot of bloopers from this one. That's a good thing. You might have a lot of little outtakes to deal with.
Or just some bad takes in general.
Yeah. This has been quite the uphill battle to get this episode recorded.
I don't know if it's so much of a blooper reel as a, hey, these people have no idea what they're doing.
I know, maybe we don't want to share this with people. Franklin was on for a bit. It's been a lot already. So let's just dive right in.
Just dive right in.
So today we are talking about karma and talking about the history of it, where it came from, how it's all kind of, maybe more than meets the eye, right? A lot of people think of karma as good, bad. That's kind of how I think about it. And we'll dive in a little more about that.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So Nick, maybe you could talk about the concept of it and where it started and how it's evolved over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, I don't think that the perspective of, that karma is based on good or bad is necessarily wrong, because I mean that is the underlying principle, right? So I think that is a valid way to think about it. But people talk about karma, or they joke about karma, or it'll come up in everyday life as sort of this very binary thing of, if I do a good thing, then a good thing's going to happen to me. And that's really not what karma originally was sort of intended, or the philosophies behind karma. So if you think about where it stemmed from, in modern society, we really think about it more in line with sort of the Buddhist principles and Buddhist teachings and things of that nature. But the concepts and the origins of karma really predated that. And one thing that's important to think about before we dive into this, or actually before, I kind of already said this, but if you don't know, karma is basically the principle of, you do actions and you perform your actions, and all of those actions have a positive or a negative outcome, right? Or have a positive or a negative connotation to them. And the more that you do good things or bad things, you sort of build up this, store, if you will, or this bucket of good karma versus bad karma. And the theory is that if you build up more good karma than bad karma, then more good things are going to happen to you, versus if you do a lot of bad things, bad karma will happen to you, right? And a lot of people struggle with this concept because they see things like people who continuously behave in bad manners or take bad actions, but nothing bad happens to them, and they say, well, then karma isn't real. And so the hope is, through this conversation, people have a little bit of a better understanding of the spiritual and philosophical origins of karma to implement it to their daily life. So prior to Buddha, the societies really looked at things from the perspective of mind, body, and then sort of something else, right? And that something else was typically, a god or multiple gods, and it was sort of in this realm of spirituality. Buddha starts to talk about it in a little bit of a different way, and what Buddha says is, it's not only mind and body, but it's also things like feelings, it's perception, it's your just individual disposition in the world, it's your conscious mind, it's your awareness, right? And so he starts to take this sort of additional approach to karma, or additional viewpoint of karma, in which that it's not only just about the physical body, it's not about the mind, but it's also about how your interactions with the world can sort of influence the actions that you take. So I'd be curious to get your perspective, because I know you've done a lot of research on sort of the mind and mind-body and mind-gut connection, and spirituality and this concept of sort of Buddha's take on it is a little bit different, obviously from a physiological perspective. But I'd just like to get your thoughts on sort of all of that.
Yeah, so I think I've done a lot of research on, the mind-body connection, and that's where a lot of my focus has been, on the physical side, physiologically what's happening and what are the underlying reasons for it, right? And then Nick's always been more on the spiritual side. And I think all of them are where it becomes very hard to measure is, these are hard things to measure, right? Yeah. Like, how do you measure spirituality, right? Mind and body, right? There have been a lot of studies that I've researched about those connections of how your mind actually causes physiological changes in your body, right? Either by releasing hormones or putting you into a fight or flight or fight, flight, freeze reaction, right? That your body can control what your physical body's doing, not just in that moment of maybe raising your blood pressure, making your hands sweat, making you nervous, right? But like at a cellular level, it can affect, right, things underneath the surface that you're not seeing. And I find it so interesting. And then I've also researched a lot about how it's not just the mind to the body, but the body back to the mind, right? The gut actually has its own communication system where it can send out signals back to the brain and cause different thoughts and feelings and reactions from the gut, right? So it is a two-way street. And there's a lot of research on like the vagus nerve, right? And like there's this nerve that then can put you in a calm state. It can help your mood. If you stimulate it, it can help you to be calmer. So those areas, mind and body, I feel like I understand more and I've read more research on, but the spiritual side is like this unknown, right? To most people, right? Even if you have a strong spiritual conviction, right, and you feel very strongly with whatever religion or spirituality you follow, it's very hard to measure. But I do think the concept of having some sort of spirituality, whatever it is, can really motivate you and make you feel connected to others, right? I mean, organized religion or different spirituality, right? Some of the underlying concepts are similar, even if you're maybe the thoughts and the actual actions are slightly different, right? Or what you believe is different. The concept is connectedness, right? Togetherness and working towards a similar goal, right? So I feel like it's hard to measure, but there have been studies that show, right, when people are in a group and they're working towards the same goal, that there is an effect of that, right? That you can actually impact other people just through your thoughts, right? And I have read I'm trying to think of the books I read on this, but it's super interesting of like, if I have a certain thought and I'm really focused on it, I can actually affect you and the way that you might be thinking. I can affect your mood. I mean, that's one that makes sense. If you're around someone that's just very toxic, right, your mood is actually going to be affected by that person. So it can have a positive or negative effect, right? So almost in a way, it's like they're affecting you, even though you might not have actually done anything, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on. And you know, as you talked about sort of the, you know, the mind and gut connection and sort of what that two-way, you mentioned two-way street, and like what I would offer for consideration with as it relates to karma is that it may actually be a third street, right? And depending on your religious beliefs, that may either be an overarching guiding principle, or as the Buddha talks about it, it's your level of consciousness, it's your perception. Even in Christianity, even though there is this sort of altruistic being that is superior in ways to a human being, they still have the concept of free will, right? And there's still this concept of you have your individual actions. And so all the things that we're talking about, whether it's your mood or your actions, you know, it all circles back to this concept of karma and this concept of how your actions and your intentions and your thoughts and your, you know, intentions and all of these things impact the society at what are the impacts of what you do essentially, right? And so like there is this question of, you know, is any of this real, right? Like you raised it, and from a spirituality perspective, it's next to impossible to measure.
Yeah.
And that isn't like you know, what is actual real? Like, hey man, what's real? Like nothing's real. Like it's not that, but like it is to say, like, I think a lot of people do search for the truth in some of these guiding principles. And one of the things that's important when you're talking about karma to think about is that karma is only real as it relates to the relative truth. And so what does that mean? Essentially what that means is if you have a perception that karma is real and that you want to build up good karma, then you're naturally going to take more steps to have actions that have a positive impact on the world. Now, does that mean that outcome is necessarily going to be good? Maybe not, right? And there's a lot of, you can go down a whole path of ethical dilemmas and whether, you know, what is the ethical choice and whatnot. But what, you know, from my research, what I've studied with karma is that the more that you align with this principle of believing in doing something for the betterment of other people and for the wellness of other people or the wellness of yourself, as long as you're trying to be true to your true self and you're trying to be honest with your true self, then you're building up good karma. Some people may view those actions as negative actions. Some of the things you may do as a result of you looking out for your own well-being, or you pursuing being more closely aligned with your higher self or your true self. Some people may view those actions as selfish actions. Some people may have negative impacts. Does that mean that you've now created negative karma for yourself? Maybe not. And so that's where this whole sort of concept of karma gets really muddy, is that people think that there's this very rigid, sort of bylaws of if you take this action, then that's going to be a negative karma point against you, and that there's some scorecard out there that's keeping track and saying, well, in this lifetime you have 72 bad karma, so here's this bad thing that equates to 72. It's not really that. It's really more about being in line with your perceptions and being and trying to get as closely in line with your true self as possible. I
think that's an interesting point is, there's a difference between doing the things that you think are good and are moral and ethical, right, and are for the greater good, and actually being true to yourself. And those might be the same things in some case, right? But like example of like going to church, people are like, oh, I go to church, so that's good karma, right? Because I'm going to church, I'm supporting my religion, I'm praising God, or whatever you support, I'm donating to the church, that's good karma. And I'm not saying it's not, right? But there's a difference between like living your life in those principles, right, which is going to produce a lot more good karma than like, well, I go to church, so then the other days I can do XYZ that maybe isn't as good because they're going to net each other. But it's being more like really looking at yourself, right, and making sure that you're happy and content with the decisions you're making, right, and that you're being true to yourself, looking at the greater good, right? Like our daughter's school is Montessori, and they talk about like care for self, care for others, care for nature. And I think those are three, like if you follow those principles, right, and these are little kids that are learning this at a young age, and I really like that concept of like care for yourself, care for others, care for nature. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are, doesn't matter if you're religious or not. Like Nick and I always come at the spirituality from different perspectives. I always used to think spirituality is really religion. I used to put them in the same bucket, and I was not raised religiously, and so to me it's all very foreign. And Nick's really helped me realize like it doesn't have to be religion. It's whatever your spirituality is, so much more than that. Okay. And I think it's having that connection to yourself and trying to take care of yourself, others, and nature, right? To simplify it in the words of Maria Montessori, right?
No, but I think that's right. And to not to be redundant, but to go back to it, like when Buddha talks about karma, it doesn't come from this place of what is the right moral code. Mm-hmm. Like he really doesn't discuss that at great length. What he says rather is it's taking actions that genuinely promote the well-being of yourself and others. Mm-hmm. And so that's not, so what you just said is exactly it. Like it's not about being selfish. It's not about I want this thing, and so I'm going to do this thing and if I do this thing because it's what I think I want, then I'm going to have good karma. Because that may not be it may not be to your own well-being. It may not be to the well-being of others. So mm-hmm. it's sort of flipping the thought process as opposed to being like, this is right, this is wrong, and everything that's right will give me good karma, everything that's wrong will give me bad karma. It's really flipping that perspective of how do I, in this life and in lives to come, if you believe in reincarnation, how do I ensure that I'm living a life and I'm taking actions and doing things that is in alignment with getting the universe to be in the best place possible and is in everyone's best interest and is really trying to push this well-being. And that's why when you think about, and this is, we try to avoid politics in this podcast, but that's why, when I've been meditating a lot on the most recent election, and you look at a polarizing figure like Donald Trump, and people will say, oh, he, people have various perspectives, and I really don't even want to go into giving an example, but like there is a perception that everything that he does is evil. And similarly, there's a perception that everything he does is good, right? Mm-hmm. And the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, but at its core principle, like Donald Trump is nothing more than another human being. Like, yes, he's an elevated stature, yes, he's a celebrity, yes, he's a former president, yes, he's a president-elect, etc. A huge figure in today's society, but like at the end of the day, he is still a human being. And it's not for us to judge or for us to say whether he is actually, his true intentions or motivations are to pursue the well-being of others or not. Like, we don't know. All we can do is look at our own selves and look at our own lives and say, these are my guiding principles. These are my guiding lights. These are the things that I think that I can do that can improve my own well-being, that can improve my neighbors and family and community around me. These are the areas in which I can contribute to try to push what I consider to be well-being and get myself as closely aligned as to my true self as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so I guess talking about morality of it, or that side of it is, I think a common thing that I've heard people say is, okay, so if there is a kind of system of like do good things, do bad things, why do you think that bad people, right, people that maybe do a lot of bad things might get good things happening to them, right? Like it's kind of like counterintuitive to what you would think with karma. If someone's maybe continuously doing negative things, why are they still maybe getting ahead, right, or not being punished?
Yeah. No, it's a tough question to wrestle with. It is, and I think there's a couple of ways that I view that. I mean, the first is, when people have a pattern of behaviors and actions that are bad or evil or with malice intent, if you will, I would offer that individual is already suffering. And that individual may already be receiving the negative karma from a past life. So first and foremost is that karma may not come back to you in this lifetime, right? And whether you believe in reincarnation or not, I think most people believe in some form of an afterlife. And even if you completely are nihilistic and you don't believe that there's any afterlife and all this is pointless, then you wouldn't believe in karma anyway, and it doesn't matter. Right?
Fast forward to next episode.
Yeah, exactly. So that use case aside, if you do believe that in reincarnation, you do believe in an afterlife, then it's reasonable to sort of chalk up that to that person isn't receiving, that person is building up a bucket of negative karma that is either already a part of their spiritual being because of actions in their past, and that is their way of dealing with the suffering that they've encountered from previous lives, or the other side of that is that, and this really goes down the rabbit hole of Buddhist reincarnation, but there's this principle that when we get reincarnated, we actually choose as spiritual as when we're sort of spirits and whatnot, we choose when we return to this human experience, and that there's an actual conscious choice of I don't know if conscious choice is the right this word or not, but there's an actual sort of reason that you chose the family that you chose, the lifestyle that you chose, the person that, like, all of that was like, I want to experience this type of life. Maybe it's a tree, maybe it's a cat, maybe it's a dog, whatever the case may be, but that when you're in that interim state between death and a reincarnation, that you actively make that decision. So there's also I don't know if it's Buddhist or where the philosophy originated from, but there's also this theory of, or I think it's a parable where there's this child or this monk that's trying to learn how to obtain enlightenment, and one of the teachers says, well, the way in which you gain enlightenment is by having a full understanding of everyone and everything in the universe. And the student says, well, how do I do that? And he says, well, it's easy. You just experience everything, right? And so it's possible that maybe this person or this being that is, extremely negative and does really bad things or whatnot, maybe that person has actually built up so much good karma that the only thing they don't understand is creating negative karma. And so that's an entity that needs to exist in order for that spiritual being to obtain enlightenment, because they've only done good for however many hundreds of lifetimes prior to that. So it's really, I mean, it's a very deep philosophical conversation that we could go down a lot of rabbit holes, but but I do think that's an interesting perspective.
But and I think the way I think about it is like, the thought of this person doesn't seem to embody good things. Why are they having good things happen to them? But I always try to remember that you said this to me this morning, and I, try to remember this a lot, especially if I come into contact with someone difficult, like this grinchy person we came to this morning. That was awful. But anyway, so Nick always reminds me, like, you have no idea what's going on in that person's life, right? And I sometimes struggle with that, but you just have no idea what people are dealing with. When our daughter was younger and she was really sick, right? Sometimes I would think, like, why is this happening to us? Like, we're new parents. Why is this happening to us? And then I would like quickly remind myself that everyone's dealing with something, right? Some of my friends who had babies at the same time, their kids were healthy, they weren't having these issues, and I felt like, well, this isn't fair. And then I think once you come out of the darkness, right? Like, we really felt, when we've said this a lot, like, there's a reason why we're her parents. There's a reason why she's our daughter, why we went through this, right? And I think it's this brand, right, was coming out of it and saying, okay, this is part of our purpose, is to help other people, right? And to give back and to try to share our story of hope, right, to others. So I think there's always something behind the curtain, somebody that seems like they have it all together. I promise you they don't, right? And that's not to put anyone down. It's just the reality. So I think when you see these things at the surface level of perception that this person maybe doesn't deserve the things they're getting, or things are always coming negatively towards you, and it's just your bad karma. It's like, well, actually, maybe step back, right? Nick talks a lot about being the observer in situations, trying to take yourself out of yourself in a way, right? And away from the ego, and look at things kind of, although we've talked about this is not a binary black and white topic, I think there's always a opportunity to peel that back and to be honest, not worry about what's happening to other people. Like, are you living the life that you feel good about, more than, hey, so-and-so did this, but they still got the promotion, or what I was saying about, like, my daughter has this illness, other people don't have sick kids. Like, that's not fair. It's like, well, that's not how it works. We all have something we're dealing with. And I think it's finding that purpose for it and turning it into an opportunity, right? Like, we could have wallowed of, our daughter was sick, and this, and I had those thoughts for sure, and I'm being vulnerable and sharing that, right? But I tried to then turn it around, or we had a lot of conversations about it. Turn it around. It's not poor us, poor her, right? It's, here's an opportunity to affect our lives, right? First it was get our family healthy. Now it's trying to help our friends and family, right? And trying to broaden that to help the greater good, because I think that there's a lot of opportunity there for us to do that.
Yeah.
But
no, I think that's all spot on and accurate. And the only thing I would add to that is and this is somewhat going off of the concept of karma, but it is aligned with being your true self, which is that your circumstances and being in the present moment is what's going to help you to identify what that true self is. And I think that's something I knew that I've struggled with for a long time. What I thought to be my true self really wasn't, and it took a lot of self-reflection and a lot of facing, we talked about this in the last podcast episode, facing things that were against what I thought I wanted, or against my beliefs, or against my really challenge my fundamental core principles. And unbeknownst to me, I was probably building up negative karma because I was pursuing this lifestyle that didn't serve me, that wasn't in my own well-being, that wasn't a lifestyle in which I was interested in giving back to the community. It wasn't a lifestyle in which I was, I wasn't playing music, which is something that was so core to my being for, the first 20 years of my life. I neglected spirituality to a large degree, right? And so, now, 5 years later, 6 years later, whatever it is, now that we're kind of on the other side of the hill, so to speak, Now I look back at it and I say, okay, how am I right now in my own present, being in the present moment? Like, what is the best way that I can align with my true self and take actions that are going to improve my own well-being and improve the well-being of others? And really kind of let that be the North Star, as opposed to psychoanalyzing or, strategizing or whatever the case may be for whatever promotion, career thing, family thing, personal relationship thing, whatever it is that I was pursuing at any given moment. And I think that's the core point, is just, when you think about karma, sure, it's fun to joke when you say something mean to somebody, or you bust on somebody, and then you walk into a chair and everyone goes, oh, see, it's instant karma. Like, it's fun to joke about that, and it's fun, and like, that is, it is funny, and maybe that is true. But I would challenge you, when you're thinking about karma, to really think about, how can you be in the present moment? How can you figure out what it means to be your true self, and really focus on actions and intentions that are not only in the interest of your own well-being, but the well-being of the others around you.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
With that, I think we're ready to close. The live streaming meditation sessions are going really well. I've got 2 tracks ready to produce, ready to go live with. So I've been in the studio cranking on that. I've got another concept that I'm working on. So in January, look out for some dates on that coming about. We're also going to be releasing all of our past podcast episodes and our clips and everything else on YouTube. That's where we're going to be live streaming. So if you want to re-listen to everything and see our faces while we're saying it, go ahead and head on over there. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next episode, and I hope to see you soon.